How about that? What's up, guys? Welcome back to Project Parker. Welcome back to Project Potter. My name is Kyle, your host, or should I say Tony Stark, guys. We got the jacket, we got the Avengers shirt, guys, because the Avengers are heavily introduced here. And of course, we got the Tony Stark glasses. Guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Kyle, your host, and we're going through the Spider-Man movies here, guys, once again, every night leading up to No Way Home. I'm getting real excited, guys, which I've said every night. The exciting level just goes up and up and up and up. Tonight we're doing Spider-Man Homecoming, the Tom Holland MCU, not debut because he debuts in Civil War, but the first MCU solo Spider-Man movie. So if you guys have not seen the series before, what we're doing is my favorite scenes, some issues and worst scenes that I had with the movies, score out of 10, and the rankings, of course. So appreciate you guys stopping by. If you do like the content, please like, comment, subscribe, and here we go. So, guys, this movie is an interesting one because I have always just felt like this movie is just a little off to me. Like, I'm going to get into some of my favorite scenes here, guys, but there's just something that's missing from this movie, and I don't know if it's coming off the high of Amazing Spider-Man 2 last night. Go check out my review on that one, guys. I was very, very high on that movie. It's just there's a great shell here for a great movie, but we're missing the meat. And so some of the things I did like, guys, Tony Stark, guys. Tony Stark. Like, what more can I say about the man? Love seeing Robert Downey in here. This movie is heavily into the MCU, like almost where I was like a little put off, guys. And I freaking love the MCU. I have a wall full of MCU movies. Okay, you guys have seen it. I love the MCU, and even in this movie, I was like, we don't need to keep referencing the MCU. And maybe it's because I'm just coming off of the Raimi trilogy and then the Amazing duology, where it's like those are their own movies and their own universes, and I've been enjoying those movies a lot more than I thought I would. And then we come back here, and it's like, oh look, it's the Avengers. Oh look, it's Thor. Oh look, it's Captain America. And I was like, I don't know if we need all that in a Spider-Man movie. It's like, so Spider-Man almost feels like a B plot in this movie, but the dynamic between Ned and Peter is great. I thought that was awesome. Peter's interest in Liz, I thought, was really great, and I'll have more to say about that at the end of this, guys. But and then obviously Robert Downey or Tony Stark, I should say, and Peter's interactions are great. There's the whole scene in the limo where he's like reaching for the door, and he's like, oh, that's not a hug. He's like, I'm just getting the door for you. He's like, we're not there yet. That's great. There's a heavy dose of happy in this movie, which I really like. Peter figuring out how to use his suit, and like, Ned trying to be like the voice of reason and being like, I don't think we should disable this tracker. I don't think we should, take off training wheels protocol. And he's like, dude, I'm fine. He's like, they need to stop treating me like a kid. And then Ned's like, you are a kid, dude. And we find out Peter is 15 in this movie. And I was like, oh, Tom Holland looks very young. But when he's going through the park, the explosion first happens with Shocker or like Tomb's crew, where they're trying to sell the weapons, and they're literally like in Central Park blowing up, like shooting up huge smokes of blue energy or whatever. And Peter sees that, and he's like, he's gonna do the party trick, and then he's like, no, this is stupid. And then he goes over there and he shoots his web up, and he's like in the golf course, and he's like, this sucks. I really like that part, guys. Although Peter doesn't really interact with his classmates at all in this movie, like at all, really. I really thought, and he's like always going off, and Zendaya's watching him, or MJ, I should say. And it's just, there's some strange dynamics, but I'm trying to be positive about this movie, but I am also being honest about this movie. But there is stuff to like here. I mean, Michael Keaton as Vulture, guys, come on. I mean, one of the best MCU villains in the history of the MCU. Like, awesome stuff. Michael Keaton is amazing. The huge reveal, obviously, guys, the big reveal is when Peter's having a good time. He's getting ready. He's into Liz. He goes to Liz's house right after the ferry scene, which kind of hit or miss for me. The ferry scene where Tom goes there. Excuse me, not Tom. Tom, but Peter. Peter goes there, and he's like, oh great, I'm gonna catch the bad guys. He's like, we got the buyers, we got the sellers. He's like, don't worry. And Tony calls him, and we get this great interaction of the whole movie where Tony is like remote, and he's like in Dubai or whatever, and he's like, oh, you're lucky this place has Wi-Fi, because Tony saves his life when Vulture originally captures him, and he's like drowning in the lake, and one of the Iron Man suits comes and saves him. But they're on the ferry, and then Tom, like, I keep saying Tom, Peter like webs one of the weapons, and Toombs says like, look, you're messing with technology you don't understand. And then like he webs it down, he thinks it's good, but then it starts shooting up and it cuts the ferry in half. And then we get the iconic shot of Peter like struggling to put the ferry together, but he's kind of failing. And he's like, oh my God, what do we do? And he starts webbing everything. And they're like, you were 98% effective. And I was like, dude, 98%, like the thing splits and then it starts like flooding. And I'm like, you were 0% effective, dude. Like you didn't do shit. It's either you win or you lose. You're first or you're last, dude. Okay. Because winners get to do what they want. And I don't think Tom Holland is a winner in this movie. I'll tell you that much. I tell you who is a winner, guys. Mr. Tony Stark. Ned working with Peter, I think, is awesome. Guy in a chair. He literally has the guy in a chair moment. And I was like, okay. But there are just a lot of elements in this movie that I think did not hold up. And it just, the things I don't like about this movie, I think really stuck out for me. And then there's even things that I think I kind of enjoyed more in the past. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if this movie ages particularly well. And this is a fun movie, but it's not like, there's just something missing from this movie, guys. And it's just, Peter doesn't have his own identity in this movie. It's really just like, there's too much MCU tie-in. Another good thing I love, guys, Marissa Tomei. I mean, come on, man. I LARP her, let me tell you that much. That's a great scene, though, the LARP scene where she's like, come on, you usually love your LARP. She's like, not too LARPy, not LARPy enough. And she's like, come on, you haven't touched anything. And then there's like a guy that brings over a dish and she's like, oh, we didn't order this. And he's like, on the house. And then she's like, oh, and he goes, I think he LARPs you. And I was like, oh, good one. That's a good one, Peter. We get the scene when I do love that there's a bodega in this movie. Okay. Playing Miles Morales recently, I'm like, this is some Miles vibes here, dude. There's a great scene where he runs into Aaron Davis later, who played by Donald Glover. Love Donald Glover, dude. Everyone go watch Atlanta if you haven't seen Atlanta. It's fantastic. And I don't know if it got canceled or what, but they needed to come up with a new season because that's an amazing show. Donald Glover's there as Aaron Davis, and he's like, he's got the interrogation mode and all that stuff, but it just all feels kind of childish to me. But he goes up there and he's like, yo, I like my bread. He says, I like my bread. And then he's like, they're talking about the different bodegas and the subs and stuff. But we do get a great scene with Peter in the beginning where he's like, hey, he says like, he's like, how's your aunt? And he's like, oh, she's doing good. And then he says in Spanish to his coworker or whatever, he's like, very hot Italian woman. And then he understands Spanish. And he's like, how's your daughter? And he says it in Spanish. And he's like, you know what, $10. And he's like, what, it says $5? He's like, for that comment, $10. And I was like, okay. I like that stuff. I love Flash in this movie. We don't get enough of him, but I mean, when he's just picking on Peter, like this is the coolest Flash for sure. And this is a much different rendition of Flash. This is more of a normal Flash, where the past iterations has been like this big, huge jock. I like this Flash a lot, where he's just like he's still picking on Peter, but it's like, he's not going to beat Peter up. He's just like kind of going to harass him a little bit verbally, where he's like, when I say penis, you say Parker, penis, Parker. That's all great stuff, dude. It made me laugh every time. We got Guilfoyle from Silicon Valley in here, and he's like, I'm not going to lose a student on a field trip. He's like, not again. I love the scene when Tony comes out of the suit. Tony saves his ass at the ferry where, Tom's pulling on it or Peter's pulling on the things like as hard as he can. And I will say that Peter wants to save everyone in this movie and his effort is there. He's just a young, dumb 15-year-old kid. And so he's not, like Tony says, he's not ready to be an Avenger. He's not ready yet. And Peter's saying like, I am ready. There's a great scene where he's got his mask up and he's eating a churro and he keeps texting, calling Happy. And he's like, it's Peter, by the way, Parker. And he's calling, getting his voicemail. And every time Happy will pick up like every 10th time. And he's like, don't call me. He's like, or don't. He's like, you don't have to talk. We don't have to talk. And it's like, he's talking about like ATMs and he's trying to tell him about super powerful weapons. But Happy's like, dude, this is nothing. I'm worried about moving Tony Stark's shit. Okay. He's like, we got to put it into this fucking invisible plane that has no security on it. And he's like, we got to move to the other location, to the new Avengers place. And it feels a little too like fan servicey for me. And I am a sucker for Easter eggs and fan service, but I don't know if I just wasn't in the mood for it. But when Tony comes out of the suit and he's like, okay, you messed up. Because he's like, what if someone died today? He's like, that would have been on you. And he's like, and if you died today, that would have been on me. And I was like, dude, that's why Tony Stark is just the best. Like, and we get very minimal Iron Man in this movie. We get obviously one of Iron Man's like suits saving Peter. And then we get Tony showing up in the flesh in New York. And when he like literally has all these awesome, like not nanotech, but all these little things, these boosters that go on the side of the ferry and push it together. And then he uses his like unibeam to to save the fairy. And there's a great scene where that guy's like, yeah, Spider-Man. And then Spider-Man kind of fucks up and he's like, yeah, Iron Man. And it's like, we get to do a flip guy, which apparently is the same guy from Shang-Chi. Or apparently the guy in Shang-Chi is the same guy from Homecoming, where he's like, are you Spider-Man? He's like, hey, are you the Spider guy? He's like, yeah, call me Spider-Man. He's like, do a flip. And he's like, yeah. That's a great scene, but I wouldn't even say a great scene. It's a good scene, but that's the problem with this movie, I think, guys, is there's a lot of good scenes. I don't think there's a lot of great scenes in this movie. And so those are kind of the few scenes that I think were good. But guys, we're going to go right over to some issues I had with this movie and the worst scenes. Guys, Peter Parker, first of all, we don't get an origin, okay? And I don't want to see Peter Parker get bit by a spider once again. I don't need to see any of that. Oh, sorry, guys, really quick. One last great scene. Obviously, the opening when he's shooting on his iPhone or whatever, and like we get that scene from Civil War when he says Underoos and he jumps in, and it's like a different scene, but it's funny because like Happy's basically babysitting him, and he's like in the hotel and he's like vlogging everything, and he's like, why are you doing that voice? And he's like, because it's fun, and he's like, you can't show that to anyone. You know that, right? And he's like, yeah, it's okay. And like, it's just like, it feels like a parent-child relationship. And then Peter is like in the hotel room and he's like, yeah, and this happened and this happened. He's like telling Civil War. And then Happy's like in the next room and he like flips over the bed. And then he's like, we got thin walls here. And he's like, basically like, dude, I know what you're doing, dude. He's like, don't fucking release any of that shit. And I think this is funny too, because Tom Holland always ends up like leaking all the MCU stuff. So this is like a play on that. But yeah, those are some of the things I liked, guys. Now on to the dislikes. Hey guys, I don't think Peter Parker has his own story in here. I mean, he is sitting around and it's like a coming of age tale. I don't like how young they made Peter Parker in here, where maybe I'm just coming off of the cool ass Andrew Garfield, Peter, or even Toby. Like, I know he was a high school kid, but he just seemed more mature. This is just a different, like, this. So Peter Parker is like really smart, right? And we know that, but we don't see too much of that. We see Tom like, take out the tracking chip, but like that's Ned's. He's using Ned's help to use his laptop to hotwire the suit, which you think Tony would put in some sort of defense against that so he couldn't just take out the tracking chip. But, Tom, he's just a kid. And it's like, which works for the story a little bit, but also I'm like, Tom just doesn't seem like he has any idea what's going on. And he's this reckless kid. And maybe that's the point, but he's not ready to be an Avenger. And I just didn't find his story all that interesting. I was like, okay, so we're not getting an origin, which is fine, but we're also like, okay, he just gets a suit. Like, I was like, how do you have super strength? How did you get all these powers if you weren't bit? Or maybe you were bit, but it wasn't really explained. He just shows up in Civil War, and it's, I don't know. When Tony shows up in that movie, he's got his homemade suit and stuff, but it just, I was kind of bored with the story where they're going in high school, but there's no big villain. I mean, Vulture is the villain, and I love that Michael Keaton is the big reveal there, but he's kind of doing his own thing. I was standing up for Vulture a lot more in this movie, where I was like, yeah, man, he's scavenging. The movie opens with after the Battle of New York, and there's that big alien ship, and they're taking the alien hardware, and they have to turn it all in, and he's like, let's keep a little bit of it. And then 8 years pass, and they like their business is booming, and they're selling weapons to criminals. And then there's like scene at the end where Peter is like trying to stop him, and he's like, oh, I know, but you shouldn't be selling super weapons to super criminals or whatever. And he's like, oh, what do you think your buddy Tony Stark was doing, dude? And it's like, well, Tony Stark started by making weapons, but then we know from Iron Man 1 that he changed it when he almost died from his own weapons. So I'm like, I don't know if that argument really holds up, but I don't know, man. There's just, like I said, Peter doesn't interact with any of his classmates. He's on the Washington trip. They're all in the elevator, and then he swings in to save them. But he's into Liz, and I thought their dynamic was great. But there's actually like very few scenes. Like, he has the moment where she's like, oh, let's come swim in the pool, and they're all having fun, and they're like little kids, not little kids, but like high school kids, like having a good time. And she's like, oh, we're rebelling, we're not supposed to be out or whatever. And it's like, this is what dumb kids would do. They just go in the pool and like splash around and shit. It's like a nice bonding moment. It's like how you grow up. And then Peter's like, oh, he's like watching them, and then he's like, oh, he goes and chases after the criminals. And it's like, okay, I guess, but I mean, Happy's literally like, dude, we have other people doing that. And then in a world, well, I think the problem is the universe that this is set in, we have the Avengers. Tony calls the FBI. He's like, dude, let the FBI do their job. And so when Peter sits in the Peter's in the car, right? That great scene where he's in the car and Michael Keaton finds out that he is Spider-Man. And he's like, hey, Gumdrop, go in. He's like, I'm going to have the dad talk with Peter. And then he's like, I will fucking kill you if you ever interrupt my business again. He's like, look, you saved my daughter's life. He's like, I'm so thankful for that. So he's like, I'm going to give you that as your pass. And he's like, do not interfere with my business again. And I'm like, dude, not only do you have to not be, you can still be Spider-Man and like let other people interfere with his business. Like, you don't have to, like, just let the dude sell his weapons, you know? The Avengers will take care of it, or the FBI or whatever, and you're good. It's not like there's, you know, this isn't a Thanos level threat, okay? It's just Adrian Toomes selling some weapons, okay? It's not a big deal. It's a little bit harder for the Avengers. Thor can just come down and fucking wreck people, dude. There's a great line where Tony says to, when like Tom's in trouble or whatever, Peter's in trouble, and Tony says like, he's like, oh, I was, you know, you trusted me when I went up against Captain America. And he's like, trust me, dude, if Cap wanted to lay you out, he would have laid you out. He's like, basically, like, he took it easy on you. It wasn't a real fight in Civil War anyway. They were kind of going half-assed. And then when they did go hard, that's when War Machine got hurt. We're not going to talk about that too much, guys. But yeah, I don't know, man. It just, a lot of the scenes that like were trying to be funny just didn't really hold up for me. Like, I don't know, when they're like sneaking around the hall and then he's like, they're like hiding from Toomes or whatever, and then the guy like knocks down. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Chess." He's like, "You good?" I don't know. The party was weird. Like, it didn't really feel like there was a point to this movie. I felt like, and again, this is a 15-year-old kid, so he's a dumb high school kid. They're gonna go to parties and stuff. I liked when like Aunt May was going through and dropping them off, but there's just a lot, guys. A lot was just missing, and this is like 2 hours and 13 minutes, and I just felt like it was kind of a slog, and I was like checking my phone, and I was just kind of bored. And I've seen this movie a few times, but I've never really loved it. When Peter goes into the, he gets trapped, Vulture's like stealing from the truck or whatever, and they do have that really cool effect where it like opens up, it basically opens up like a seal where they can go through like ceilings and stuff, and they use it in the plane later, and then he can like control it. So like Peter goes in there and he turns it off, so Peter's stuck in the truck, and then he just gets like stuck in this warehouse, which is like the scene behind me where he puts the suit on, and that's like how he discovers all of his powers. But no one fucking notices that there's no security cameras or whatever that shows like a warehouse of like Peter being in there. And then when he gets out, right, he hacks the security thing, finally tries all the number combinations, then he gets out, and then he literally like rides on a truck. Also, why is Peter Parker, or why is Spider-Man riding on so many cars, dude? Like, I understand that you need a tree or something to swing onto, to whip onto, but like, we don't see Peter, like, I don't know, maybe it's because they moved him out of the city and so he had to improvise. But I was just like, dude, this is lame. Like, seeing Spider-Man ride on the back of cars and like nobody reacts to it. Nobody's like, what the fuck? Why is there a fucking spider on my car? Like a man dressed as Spider-Man. It just seemed weird. And like, I don't know. No, the world doesn't really know about Spider-Man, I don't think. I don't think the events of like Civil War like went public. So no one was like, whoa, where's Spider-Man? Like, it just felt weird. And I needed this world to be about Spider-Man, and it was just so much about the Avengers. And it was just like, oh, there are bigger things at stake here. And it was kind of like, I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know if Spider-Man should be an Avenger. And I know he has his moments, and it builds up to Infinity War, and Far From Home, he's got bigger moments too. And I'm sure No Way Home, it will be crazy. But this just felt like, I don't know, man. It just felt strange. The whole plane scene, guys, at the end, horrible. Just horrible. So Happy is loading, again, some of Tony Stark's most valuable shit. You're telling me that Tony Stark is not personally flying that plane or sitting in that plane so that if any trouble happens, he goes into his Iron Man suit? You're telling me he doesn't have like the Iron Legion who are following the plane? The plane has like cloaking ability, but there's no pilots, which is like, okay, so you're not endangering anyone. But like when things go bad, like Vulture just goes in there and he's like in the blind spots, and they have cameras, I guess, because he says stay in the blind spots. But Vulture goes in there, and then once he's in there, he like takes control of the whole plane. And I'm like, if it wasn't for Spider Man, I don't know why I just said Spider. If it wasn't for Spider-Man, dude, then that plane would have just taken all of Tony Stark's shit. And I'm like, how is all of your most valuable stuff, like these highly classified information, gonna have no security and no Avengers near it? And it's like, by Tony or Thor or Cap or any, like, no one's guarding that plane. Doesn't make any sense, dude. Happy just gets like a GPS tracker, and he's like, oh, is it on its way? And some like UPS guy is like, yep, here it is. And he's like, oh, great. Like, he's just like a concerned dad like following his family, like flying or something. Like he's just tracking a flight. And I'm like, dude, that plane is way more important. And then obviously it crashes, and I don't think there's any fallout to like, hey, all of the shit that we were working on crashed and burned, and it just doesn't like make a whole lot of sense. And the fight with Vulture is weird, and the fact that Peter gets like trapped in the rubble is okay, but then it's like he's supposed to have like the big heroic like moment, and he's like, oh, if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't be you don't deserve the suit. But it's like, okay, but I guess Tom has the powers still, but it's just weird, dude. I don't know. There's just a lot messy with this movie, and I just didn't love it. Okay, guys, that brings us to the score. Yeah, I feel like let me say this, guys. I think this movie is a 7.5. I think it is an okay movie. There's a lot of things I don't like about it, but there are still some fun moments. The soundtrack is pretty good. I don't love the dynamic. I just think that the kids are too young, but I mean, guys, when Tony Stark opens up and he's like, okay, let's do a little video for your Aunt May. And he's like, come here. And he's like, hey, May. He's like, what are you wearing? Something skimpy, I hope. And he's like, oh, and he like laughs. Robert Downey like laughs immediately because it's so funny, dude. But then we find out later that Marissa Tomei, Aunt May, she doesn't like Tony. She's like, I don't like that Tony Stark. And I'm like, oh, it's so funny because you think like Tony's so charismatic, and when he goes and sees her in Civil War, she seems charmed, and it's like you think they would just be like dating, or maybe they are dating and maybe she's playing it up. I don't know. But obviously at the end of the movie, we get the big reveal because Aunt May walks in on a suit. But I like that Tony takes the suit. I thought that was a good moment that I didn't really mention, is that Tony is like, give me the suit. And like that, Tom is like, no, please. Like Peter's like, I need the suit. And that's when he's like, he says, I'm nothing without a suit. And he says, if you're nothing without a suit, then you shouldn't have a suit. But that was a big moment. But then he just gets the suit back at the end. We get the scene at the very end, guys, where he gives him the Iron Spider suit, which I think is that the first time I think that we see the Iron Spider. And he's like, hey, oh yeah, I guess so, because in Infinity War he uses it. But I think this is the first time we actually see it in action, where he's like, hey, I'm going to introduce you. And he's like, no, that's okay. I'm good for now. And he's like, is this a test? And he's like, yeah. And then it's like, it wasn't a test. He was actually going to bring them into the Avengers. But that's another issue I have, guys, is that he says Peter's not ready for the Avengers. And then he takes down Vulture. He takes down one villain by himself. And then suddenly he's like, oh, yeah, you can be an Avengers. You can take on Avengers level threats. You can take on Thanos and stuff. And obviously they didn't know Thanos yet, but I don't know. There's just a lot in this movie that I think it's good, but not great. And even good, I feel like it sometimes. I was like, I don't know about this movie, man. There's just like him getting stuck in the building. So him going on the plane at the end there, where he's in his homemade suit. I like that he's courageous, but I'm like, dude, this is really dumb. Like, what is your plan here? All you have is your webs. You don't have any of their technology. You don't have anything like that. So I guess it shows that like he's got the heart, and that's what Spider-Man wants to save everyone, even if he's like an underdog. But yeah, I don't know. There were some moments that hit, some that didn't, guys. But I think this movie it was just not really focused on Peter Parker. And Spider-Man. It was more focused on the Avengers and like, hey, remember this big universe we got? Hey, remember all these movies? And it's like, look, I love the MCU to death, but I was in a week where I'm reviewing all these Spider-Man movies, and it's like so focused on Peter and so focused on like MJ and Gwen and all this stuff, and like, you know, Peter being really smart and me not really seeing Tom be too smart in this movie. He didn't really like invent anything himself. Tony kind of gives to him everything, and so it's just a different vibe for Spider-Man. And I think kind of as a detriment to the film and the universe overall, he's kind of relying way too much on Tony for his gadgets instead of like building his own suits or building his own web and stuff like that. So just some things I thought were missing, guys. And so I think the score, I would never say this is a bad movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. I still had fun, but it's just not what I wanted out of MCU Spider-Man. But again, this is the first one. And from what I remember, I think Far From Home is a lot better. And I'm sure No Way Home is, just from what I'm hearing early on, it's just bonkers. So this is kind of like it's a great rough draft for Spider-Man, but that's why it's given that kind of middling score for me. Okay, guys, that brings us to the rankings. So number 1, we have Spider-Verse. Number 2, we have The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which I absolutely loved and watched it last night, which probably is why I'm also giving this a lower score. But, you know, time is relative, guys. Then we have Spidey 1. Then we have Spidey 3. And then this one, guys, is slotting in at number 5 here for Homecoming. Then we have The Amazing Spider-Man 1, and then Spider-Man 2, which a lot of people love, and I still don't understand you people because I still think that movie is trash. But maybe I would watch that movie before this again? I don't know, but probably not. I was thinking really hard about these rankings, guys, and it's kind of all about the mood I'm in and the different elements and all the things. But so again, some of the movies I hated before, I'm now liking a lot more, and some of the movies I may or may not have liked, I don't like as much. But people have always loved this movie, guys, and I'm tired of pretending that I have to like this movie. Where like I don't hate this movie, like I said. It's not a bad movie, but it's not a great movie. And it's a letdown for me. And I'm just like, yeah, this is okay. It's okay. It's a 7.5. It's nothing to really write home about. It's not great. It's not going to blow my mind, or I didn't have any like emotional connection, guys. Last night I was crying from the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2. Tonight I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't really care anything that happened in this movie. I was like, okay, Tony's relationship with Peter is nice, but it hasn't quite gotten there. It's not like an Infinity War stuff. And, maybe it's like because I know what happens, it kind of detracts from it. But that's why I don't think this film holds up as much, guys. But anyway, I'm rambling, and those are our rankings for now. Okay, guys, how about that? Thanks for checking out another episode of Project Parker. Appreciate you guys stopping by. This will probably be my only Tony Stark appearance. But I don't know, guys. Maybe I'm kind of feeling this look, or maybe we show up again. Who knows? But for this series, guys, at least that's it. We got just one more movie, guys. We got Far From Home tomorrow night before we go and see No Way Home. Guys, I can't wait. I absolutely cannot wait. It's going to be great. I'm so excited. Again, I'm hearing nothing, but I wanted to go in blind to No Way Home, but I watched like a spoiler-free review here today, guys, and they're saying people who had really, really high expectations, they're saying it's blowing it out of the water, and I was like, I was worried I was too hyped for this movie. Now I'm just so excited to just sit in that theater and just let it wash over me. So appreciate you guys. Like, comment, subscribe, and until tomorrow night, guys, peace.